Hello friends, welcome to Varicals Learning Vlogs. This is CA Prince George and it's my Income Tax Act 1961 learning series. Friends, I got a call from a CA final student who had some doubts in section 5, which is scope of income, which is the last video that I had posted. And while clarifying his doubt, I realized that there is ample confusion among the students with respect to two terms which are used in that provision, which is accrue or arise. So it's not possible for me to take a lot of examples to explain those terms, the nuances and details, though it deserves a lot of examples. But I'll be just very precise in my explanation and take just couple of examples to explain. So the section uses three terms: receives, accrue, or arise. Where a person receives an income, it is his income as per the section and he will be taxable. Where an income accrues or arises to the person, still the person will be taxable. Everybody understands what does receive mean. A person is said to have received the income when he's actually received the consideration, when he's actually received the cash either in hand or a bank or the bank account, or in some form he has received the consideration. So it's pretty simple and clear. Now what does accrue and arise mean? When is an income supposed to have accrued to a person or arisen to a person? So to understand the difference, let's first try to understand or find out those scenarios which would have got missed out if the word arise was not considered in the provision, which would have got missed out from the tax net. Which are those situations? Was it possible for the department, for the income tax authority, to just live with the word accrue and receive or receive? So let's try to first understand what does accrue mean. So an income is said to have accrued to a person when the person has an enforceable right to receive the payment with respect to that income. For example, if somebody is selling goods or rendering services and the goods are already sold, delivered to the client, services are already rendered to the satisfaction of the client, and now either invoice is raised, or even if the invoice is not raised, legally the person can go and ask for the money for selling the goods or rendering the services. So when the person has the legal right, when he has a legally enforceable right to ask for the payment, that is when the income is supposed to have accrued to the person. So that's the reason why if you are receiving something in advance, it's not accrued to the person. You should have the right to receive the payment. Now if you only had the word accrue, then there are many instances which otherwise would not have got covered. For example, let's take example of house property, income from house property, where you are actually receiving the rent. It's fine, but then there is a deeming fiction also in income from house property, wherein a house is deemed to have let out, house property is deemed to be let out. In such scenarios, the annual value of the house is considered as the income in the hands of the owner of the house and accordingly taxed. Now this is a notional value which is added to the income of the person. Of course, after all those deduction, let's assume there is no deduction, but it's a notional value which is getting added. The person is not receiving any rent. The question of accruing the rent doesn't arise because the very word accrue means there is an enforceable right to payment. Here there is no enforceable right to payment. So in absence of the word arise, I'll explain what arise mean. In absence of the word arise, it would not have been possible to include such income from house property in the total income of the person and accordingly tax. So what does arise mean? Arise, as the word suggests, means something is generated. So it is from the context, it is used from the context of the source of income. When the income is generated, it doesn't matter whether the income is received or accrued or not. If the income is generated, it is said to have arisen. So in this case, in the example that I took, the income arises to the person, the house property income, and that's the reason why the department is able to tax. Now let's take another example. We had learned when we were studying the definition of income tax of income, that where through a deeming fiction where stock in trade is converted into capital assets, it will be taxed in the hands of the person. The value will be taxed, the fair value. Now again, there is no money received, no consideration received. The question of accrual doesn't arise because the person cannot sell to himself, whereas it's the same person, right, in this example. So how can income tax law tax such income, such deemed income, if there was no word, if it arise as a word was not used? So in order to bring into the income tax net these kind of scenarios, this term arise was coined, was invented. The term can also be used, for example, if there is an electricity supply company. Now let's assume the electricity supply company decides to recognize their revenue basis the total consumption or total supply of electricity to the consumer at the year end. So irrespective of whether or not billing is done to the consumers, even if for part of the month the electricity is supplied, let's assume the company has decided to recognize that in the revenue. Now again, nothing is received by the company, no payment is received by the company from the consumer because invoice is not generated and there is no enforceable right to ask for the payment because the billing cycle is still not completed. It's just 15 days in many cases. Let's take example, assume. But the company manages to take that in the revenue. Now if you did not have the word arise in the section, how would you tax such a scenario? So it will be a very strange scenario wherein revenue is considered, the company is showing profits in the financial statements, but still is out of the tax net. So everything will depend, friends, on the facts of the cases, and the interpretations also sometimes depends on the facts of the case. So that was in brief what the difference between arise and accrue, and why it was important for the department, for the framers of law, to include the term arise. Now there can also be some confusions between the use of similar terms in accounting standards. While accounting standards is more for revenue recognition and the term arise is not used, it is the term accrual which is used there. But one must understand that whenever one is interpreting a certain term, here in this case accrue or arise, it must be interpreted from the perspective of that specific law. So in the accounting standards, there can be a slightly different meaning to the term accrual. It is more for the revenue recognition. While it will be similar, but it can be different. You can use accounting standard as an external source of aid for interpretation of law, but the primary source still remains the Income Tax Act. So please do not try to always align two terms used in two different laws or two different literatures. They may or may not match. So fine, with that I'll end this video. Thank you so much, and I'll be glad if I again get calls from CA students on any doubts that they still have. Thank you so much.